So what I try to show you with the video here is that the growth rates for the GDP per capita, they change over time a lot. Of course, there are some countries that stayed at the top of the rankings, but some countries fluctuate a lot, probably because of the changing oil prices. And some other countries, they develop very quickly. So you could see, like in Japan, they caught up with the United States in a few years, especially in 1980s. And we just look at the rich countries, right? What explains the experiences of being a rich country and being a poor country? So Japan in like 1960s, it was not a rich country. The post-World War II Japan was never a rich country, but it somehow recovered from its poverty. But these days, we see lots of countries that are not recovering back from poverty. What can explain the experiences? And how can rich countries keep being rich? That's a difficult question too. And what policies should poor countries do to promote more rapid growth and then become a developed country? Many people want to know the answer for this question, the third question, right? There are many developing countries especially in Africa, and like UN or World Bank, they spend lots of money to those countries. They give out lots of money, but they are still poor. They didn't experience a big change. And what's happening there? What can we do? So we want to answer those questions. And that's the basics of the development economics. In order to answer these questions, in today's class, we proceed in 3 steps. The first one is looking at the international data on GDP per capita, as we did. And second, we look at the role of productivity. And here we will argue that productivity leads to the changes in the living standards. And we are going to see how to promote the productivity, how to improve our productivity through policies. As we saw in the video, we saw lots of different countries with different GDP per capita. Here, we have the countries, some example countries over 100 years. And you can see Japan is at the top, and of course, other countries following. This is the order of the countries with growth rate per year. Japan, among these countries, is at the top with 2.7% growth every year. But on the other hand, like some countries like Pakistan or Bangladesh, they had growth rate of around 1% each year. That's like Japan has been experiencing 3 times higher growth rate than those countries for 100 years. And that made a big difference. And these days, we are experiencing a very difficult time because of COVID. Because of COVID, almost every country is experiencing a negative growth. The businesses cannot do their business as well. So if you look at some countries like UK, Italy, Mexico, France, they are experiencing like almost 10%, negative 10% growth rate, except for the one country, China. So China is one of the few countries that's experiencing still a positive growth. But most countries are experiencing a huge drop from the previous year's growth rate. And each country has difference in growth rates. And we have seen that Japan was the country that rose very rapidly compared to others. But on the other hand, United Kingdom did not grow that fast. And in 1870, the UK was the richest country in the world. It was number one in the world. But in today, the average income of the UK is 20% below that of the US. So that means US grew faster, UK didn't grow fast compared to other countries. So why I am telling you this is that even though every country tries to become a rich country, they don't get the same result. Although the politicians are different, the economists are different, but they have the same goal. Every country wants to be richer. It doesn't mean that UK didn't try hard and US tried hard. It doesn't mean that Japanese people were smarter for 100 years than other countries. Why did some countries grow fast? Why did some countries did not? Well, we don't know the answer yet. There is no one answer. But because those differences in growth rate accumulate over time, we see a big differences in the living standards in each country these days. I have brought 3 pictures of a living house family in 3 countries. The first is UK, which has around $40,000 per capita income, and Mexico with around $8,000, and Mali with around $800. So you can see that in the GDP per capita, UK is 5 times richer than Mexico. Mexico is 10 times richer than Mali. And on the left side, you see the photo of the UK household. On the right top, you see the picture of Mexico. And on the right bottom, you see the family from Mali. And these differences in income levels can explain the differences in living standards. In order to answer that difference, we looked at one concept called productivity. Productivity is, it can be interpreted as efficiency of your production, efficiency. And productivity is a key determinant of living standards because in economics, we think the more the better. The more products we have, the better our life is. So having 2 refrigerators is better than having 1 refrigerator. Having 3 cars is better than having 1 car. So if we make more, if we are able to make more, then our living standard is higher. So what does productivity means is one person can produce more goods in 1 hour. What you produce in Japan will be different in what you can produce in another country, even though you are the same person. So productivity depends on not only your ability, but also your backgrounds too. Because in Japan, you can use electricity every day. But imagine that you live in North Korea. In North Korea, you cannot use electricity every day, like very freely. You don't have good internet services. Can you be as as efficient as you're living in here if you start living in North Korea? Probably not. You need to write your papers not by your laptops, but with your pencils. Then your productivity gets slower, even though you're the same person. And of course, the average ability or average capability of a person is different. You are all aware of using computers. You got English education too. So that means your capability could be higher than another person living in another country. So there are some ways to determine one worker's productivity. The first thing we should look at is the physical capital per worker. It looks at the stock of equipment and structures. What does it mean? It means the machines that you can use. So for example, if you're living in a country where you have tractors or very advanced machines for farming, then your productivity is high. But when you're living in a country where you have no car, no oil, no road, and where you have to do farming with your hand, then your productivity will be lower, right? So the physical capital, the capital that you can use as, I don't know, machines, that matters for the productivity. Even though you're the same person, right? Even though you're the same person. B is the difference of your ability, your knowledge, your skills, your educational background, your training background. As I told you, Japan is a country that gives around 20 years of education for every person, right? You have to go to high school. You usually have to go to high school. But in some other countries, there are countries where average person usually cannot go to elementary school. And that makes the difference of the human capital per worker. There are countries where lots of people cannot read the books, and their productivity will be different from people who can read and write. So that's called the differences in the human capital per worker. Third is the natural resources. So if you have lots of natural resources, that's better for your productivity. If you are living in a country with lots of oil, the petroleum, then probably you are more efficient. And last is the technological knowledge. So if many people understand high-tech knowledge, then you are likely to be more productive. These four things are the determinants, some examples of determinants of productivity. All right. One quick question is, we have looked at four types, and I believe that the first one, having more machines, is beneficial. Two, having better education is beneficial. And number four, technological knowledge is beneficial. So if you know more, if you get better education, if you have more machines, you have higher productivity. But are natural resources always good for growth, or are they a limit for the growth? So imagine a country that has lots of resources, lots of fish, lots of rice farming, lots of bananas, so on. So your economy grew based on those natural resources. We saw UAE's case, we saw Qatar's case, we saw Kuwait's case. They have large amount of petroleum. Are they growing? Is that a good thing for your growth? Well, Japan is one country that doesn't have too much resource, well, compared to other countries. There are countries that has lots of forest, lots of um, iron ore, lots of petroleum, lots of coal. But Japan doesn't have too much of those. But it succeeded to achieve economic growth. But some countries that have lots of natural resources, they fail to grow. So it's called the Dutch disease. And for example, if you have lots of oil revenues, if your economy is good enough with oil, then you do not have more industries. So you just sell your oil, and that's good enough for your luxurious living. So sometimes some people say that natural resources can prevent your economic growth. It's also called as the oil curse. So because you have too much money already with oil, politicians or economists, anyone, people are only interested in oil industry. So there can be lots of corruption or disruption in the economy. And it could bring to a negative result in the economic performance if you only depend on those natural resources. So some people say that having too many natural resources may not help you for economic growth in the long run. All right, let's go to the third part, which is the policy side. So we have looked at the growth, the differences in GDP performance. Second, the productivity. And last, we are going to look at how the policies can improve the productivity. And we have lots of examples. Of course, they are not everything, but we are going to look at some and how each sector can influence our productivity in general. The first one is saving and investment. Saving and investment. If you save money, what happens? If you save money, your money goes into bank, all right? And what does bank do? What does bank do? They give out loan to the companies. So if you have your whole money inside your house, that doesn't help the economy. But if you put that in the bank can give it to the companies and companies can make investments. So that's why fast growing economies have high interest rates. When governments encourage the saving plus investment, that means they are encouraging growth in the long run so that the money can flow around you and the company. But of course, what you mean by saving your money, that means you're not spending money right now. So individuals should make choice between saving or spending. And the government can offer a high interest rate to ask people to spend less now, but save more for the investment. So that's one way that government can do to promote saving and increase the productivity. The second one is called the diminishing returns and the catch-up effect. And well, diminishing returns, that means you benefit from an extra unit of input compared with other inputs. And in the long run, well, you are able to catch up with other developed countries. What do you mean by the catch up? It means you are developing faster than the developed countries. You could see in the case of Japan, Japan was poorer than US. But after 10 years, 20 years, it grew faster and it caught up with US. US was running fast, but Japan was running faster and it achieved the catch-up. That can be explained by the concept of diminishing returns. I think we learned the concept of diminishing returns in the microeconomics, right? If we put more input and more input and more input, the efficiency gets lower, right? I think we had the example of having a cafe. Having one part-time worker is efficient. Having two part-time workers, probably efficient. 3 workers, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 workers, that's less efficient. So each person will bring smaller productivity. And that's called the diminishing returns, right? Having more and more and more workers will bring less and less and less returns. So if we draw the graph, the output per worker will decrease. I'm sorry, the x-axis should be number of workers. And as you have more workers, your output per worker will decrease. But that means developed countries will have a hard time to increase their productivity. But developing countries, if they have smaller inputs, they are faster in growing. If you imagine this as x-axis as number of machines and y-axis as output per machine, if a poor country buys one machine, that helps the productivity a lot. Let's imagine a farming country, a poor farming country that no one has any machine. If you bring one tractor to that poor country, that tractor will bring lots of benefits, right? No one has used tractor before, but if one tractor goes there, it will increase a lot of productivity in that poor country. If we have one more tractor in Japan, it doesn't make any difference because there are already too many tractors in Japan. So that means having more inputs will bring more benefits to poorer countries, to the developing countries. That's how we can explain the diminishing returns and the catch-up effect. So what the countries can do is to bring more capital, right? Especially for the poor countries. This is an example of the graph that shows the catch-up of East Asian countries. You can see the traditional, I wouldn't say that, but historical rich country of USA and Germany over there. USA and Germany were at the top in 1970, right? They were having very high GDP per capita. And you can see that Japan was below that, the red line is Hong Kong and Singapore. Then there goes Taiwan and Korea. You can see that Korea was a very low, the lowest among them, and the other countries too. Over time, they succeeded in growing very rapidly. And you can see that Japan not only caught up with the two countries, but it even exceeded USA and Germany's income levels. So not very often, but sometimes the countries succeed in achieving the catch-up. And the third one is the money coming from abroad. And I hope you can remember this word, FDI, foreign direct investment. FDI stands for foreign direct investment. That means a foreigner investing to your country. Foreign money coming to your country is FDI. Yeah. You know why I am asking you repeatedly, right? FDI. You will see that in the last week. Capital investment from another country is very important for especially developing countries. Developing countries' problem is, well, there can be many problems, but one of the problems is they don't have enough money to start their business, to start an industry. So in that case, if a big foreign company comes in, invest there, then they can start their own business. So FDI is very common in these days too. For example, in Costa Rica, it's a very there are very big Intel companies, Intel factories, and it is succeeding in producing the computers. In Japan, they invest a lot in other countries like Indonesia. And Japan has lots of Toyota factories built in Indonesia, and they make lots of cars there. When Korea was growing too, Korea brought lots of factories from Japanese car makers, Toyota and Nissan. And that was the starting point to start their business. So FDI can boost up the growth, and usually they are found to have positive effects on the growth of developing countries. All right, and fourth one is education. It doesn't look like an economic topic, but education is very related to the human capital. And well, education is always, brings both short-term and long-term effects to the growth. And one of the problems that countries, developing countries face is called the brain drain. Brain drain. I hope you can remember this word. If you read this in Japanese, you know what that means, right? Smart people, they want to go to rich countries and work there. They don't want to come back, right? This was the case, same case in Japan and Korea too. People, smart people, especially scientists, they want to work at US because they can get lots of more money rather than coming back here. In the poor countries, they don't have good universities. They don't have good laboratories. They don't have good students to work together. So why don't we just stay in the US, live a happy life, rather than working for our poor country? That's called the brain drain. So I'll show you a TED talk that talks about the brain drain.
many of us care about sustainable development, livelihood of local people. Which were the plagued by poor governance, environmental destruction, and poverty. As a child, like we see most children in sub-Saharan Africa today, I really suffered from malaria. To this day, more than 1 million people die from malaria every year, mostly children under the age of 5, with 90% occurring in sub-Saharan Africa. When I was 18, I left Cameroon in search of better educational opportunities. At the time, there was just one university in Cameroon. The Nigeria next door offered some opportunities for Cameroonians of English extraction to be trained in various fields. So I moved there. But practicing my trade upon graduation as an ecologist in Nigeria was an even bigger challenge. So I left the continent when I was offered a scholarship to Boston University for my PhD. It is disheartening to see that with all our challenges, with all the talents, with all the skills we have in Africa as a continent, we tend to solve our problems by parachuting in experts from the West for short stays, exporting the best and brightest out of Africa, and treating Africa as a continent in perpetual need of handouts. After my training at Boston University, I joined the research team at the University of California's Institute of Environment and Sustainability because of its reputation for groundbreaking research and the development of policies and programs that saves the lives of millions of people the world over, including the developing world. And it has been shown that for every skilled African that returns home, 9 new jobs are created in the formal and informal sector. So as part of our program, therefore, to build a sustainable Africa together, we are leading a multi-initiative to develop the Congo Basin Institute, a permanent base where Africans can work in partnership with international researchers, but working at their own solutions to their own problems. We are using our interdisciplinary approach to show how universities, NGOs, and private business can partner in international development. So instead of parachuting in experts from the West for short stays, we are building a permanent presence in Africa, a one-stop shop for logistics, housing, and development of collaborative projects between Africans and international researchers. So this has allowed students like Michelle to receive high-quality training in Africa. Michelle is currently working in our labs to investigate the effects of climate change on insects for his PhD, and has already secured his postdoctoral fellowship that would enable him to stay on the continent. Also, through our local health program, Dr. Ngwenga Abiodun, a young Nigerian scientist, can work as a postdoctoral fellow with the Foundation for Professional Development, the University of Western Cape in Southern Africa, and the University of California at the same time, investigating the effect of climate variability and change on malaria transmission in Africa. Indeed, Ngwenga is currently developing models that will be used as an early warning system to predict malaria transmission in Africa. So rather than exporting our best and brightest out of Africa, we are nurturing and supporting local talent in Africa. For example, like me, Dr. Eric Fokam was trained in the US. He returned home to Cameroon, but couldn't secure the necessary grants. And he found it incredibly challenging to secure, to practice the level of science he could. So when I met Eric, he was on the verge of returning to the US, but we convinced him to start collaborating with the Congo Basin Institute. Today, his lab in Boya has over half a dozen collaborative grants with researchers from the US and Europe, supporting 14 graduate students, 9 of them women, all carrying out groundbreaking research, understanding biodiversity and climate change, human health and nutrition.
Okay, so you can see that he is very worried about brain drain. People who are smart can go abroad. Only a few people can do that. But if they do that, they sometimes choose not to return back. I think did you see the Nobel Prize winner this year? Did you see one of the Nobel Prize winners for chemistry was named has a Japanese name, I think it was chemistry. Was it physics? Uh, Correct me if I'm wrong. But he has a Japanese name, but his nationality is U.S. He got educated in Japan until his college, but he went to the U.S. and then he studied there. He stayed there. He changed his nationality to the U.S. Like I think he went there in 1970, where U.S. was very powerful. That could be one case of brain drain too. That person who could lead the world's chemical knowledge was a Japanese, but he stayed 30, 40 years in the US for US laboratories and for US universities. That's the case in Japan, and what would be the cases in other developing countries? They will have such a serious problem like that too. So the brain drain is one problem, and that's what the governments are trying to solve. And especially, they want to keep the engineers and scientists. Next one is the problem of health and nutrition. Well, healthier workers are more productive. That's pretty obvious, right? So if we promote health in our economy can perform better. So health leads to productivity. There are some vicious cycles in developing countries. First, they are poor because populations are not healthy. People are not healthy, so they cannot work well, so they are poor. But at the same time, they are not healthy because they are poor, because they cannot get enough medication, healthcare, and so on. So this is like a vicious cycle. Being poor leads to unhealthiness. Unhealthy people leads to poor economy. Poor economy again leads to unhealthiness of people. So that's a big problem too. And you can see that there are lots of things the government should do, but developing countries government should do to solve the problem of economic growth. Next one is called the property rights. Property rights. Why is property right important for economic growth? Because people don't want to work if there's no property right. There's one country near Japan that doesn't have almost any property right, which is North Korea. In North Korea, you don't have the property right. If you work hard, you have to get more money. But in the communist society, if you work hard, even though you work hard, you get the same pay. So you don't want to work hard anymore. And usually, having strict property rights helps or motivates people to work more. It protects your time, your work, your hard working. And by meaning that you have a good property rights, it means you can promote the political stability. And if you have a clear property rights, then you have less chance of having a corrupted politicians. So usually the property rights is a very good way to promote your economic growth. Next one, I think we only have two more things to cover today. One thing is free trade. Free trade. We look at the benefits of free trade or the gains from trade, right? Gains of trade. And usually the poorest countries, oh, I'm sorry, but I again use the same country. North Korea is a very closed country. They don't trade with other countries. And usually those countries avoid interactions. And North Korean people cannot look or cannot buy foreign products at cheap prices. So their quality is at North Korean standard, not world global standard. So their industry cannot grow that well. They just make products inside, consume inside. That was the biggest difference between North and South Korea that made the difference in the economic performance. In the past, right after um, right after the Korean War, was it? No, right before the Korean War, North Korea was richer than South Korea because it's a little bit historical background, but during World War II, Korea was under Japan, right? And Japan tried to build factories in Korea because they were going to China. So Korea was used as a factory base. And South Korea was a little bit far. So they used North Korea to use as the industrial base for the Japanese military. So most of the factories were in the North Korea. So North Korea was richer than South, but North decided to close their country. South Korea decided to open the country. And that eventually made the difference. Well, of course, there are lots of other factors too, but that was one of the most important factors. So usually we think that open economies are more beneficial for economic growth. Interacting more with the global society will help you to grow. Here's the last one. Last one is R&D, research and development, R&D. Having more knowledge is called as a public good. What does it mean? If more knowledge is in the society, people can enjoy that knowledge together. If I have the knowledge, it doesn't prevent your chance to get the knowledge. I can know it, you can know it, we can all know it. So we can share the benefit of the knowledge. And the governments promote R&D a lot. They spend lots of money for science and technology. For example, computers, they were born from the US government investments, like NASA and Air Force. And in Japan, they have lots of money to promote the R&D too. For example, they have special committee that named Japan Science for the Promotion of Science. And they give out this kind of research project named Kagaku Kenkyuhi to lots of researchers. And well, the government's money is the biggest source of the R&D. Okay, I think this one should be the last one. Population growth. Population growth is the last one. Population growth is important for GDP because more people, that means more people can work. So we can work more. But sometimes high population growth reduces GDP per worker, GDP per capita. Because GDP per capita is GDP divided by population, right? So if population grows too much, GDP per capita can go down. But usually, as a society, as a whole, population growth is the most important thing, especially in the developed countries, including Japan, US. or any other European, Western European countries that are experiencing a population decrease. So you can consider population policies as economic policies. Okay, so that's the end of lecture today. I hope you can have some discussion with your neighbors regarding the 4 questions I gave you. The 4 questions don't have the mathematical answers, as I mentioned, but they need some thinking. And I hope that the discussion with your neighbor will give you some new ideas.